We are here for another SARE National Session, and here's the deal. We have an incredible speaker today. He is Mark Vasquez. He's an attorney, partner, and head of the Texas Desk for DeForest, which is a law firm with, 80 attorneys and offices all across the United States and Mexico. But let me tell you about the topic for today. It's Legal ABCs for Your Business, Part 1. Legal ABCs for Your Business, Part 1. Listen, I don't know if you guys realize this, but in order to meet with somebody like Mark, typically, it would be a high dollar amount. So this is truly valuable time that we are getting with him, and you are going to get a chance to you're going to get a chance to have some questions and answers with him, right? You are going to get a chance to hear from him and, maybe share what you're dealing with or ask some questions based on his presentation. So just know that that's going to happen on the back end. And I'm telling you, if I were you, I would take advantage of that just to be able to hear from his expertise. Because if you don't have a law background, he has something, that we don't all hold and don't all have. So let me tell you a little bit about his background. For the last 20 years, he has been focused on corporate cross-border transactions, finance, international business, real estate, tax law. He has broad-based business transactional practice focusing on complex corporate and tax matters. And then there's this emphasis on cross-border transactions involving a wide range of companies doing business in Mexico and Latin America. And I know this pertains to so many people on this call, so it really is a gift that he's able to, be here with us. He has, he's assisted U.S. and foreign companies in the expansion of international operations through branches, subsidiaries, and representative offices, also maintenance and dissolution of such operations. He's going to be able to explain it better than I am, right? He's going to be able to get into it further. And without further ado, I'm going to mute myself and join in on the conversation by staying quiet here. And Mark, take it away. I can't wait to hear from you.
Thank you, Jenny. I appreciate that introduction, and good afternoon to all of you that are here on this webinar. And hopefully, like Jenny said, I can be a resource for you today, and give me those questions, because like Jenny said, it's rare to be able to have someone that can answer your questions, especially when you don't have to go pay for it. So I think that's like the biggest resource today is that you can get some, I guess, free type of legal, I guess, observations, advice, based on your situation. So, like I said, feel free to do that, take advantage of it. I know this is part 1, and I'll be doing part 2 next week. So, even if you don't get the questions in and, you get some between now and then, save them until then. So that'll be actually pretty good. I'm going to share my screen here as I go along so we can get into our presentation. But like, again, I'm here for you as a resource. So I am going to give you this presentation that I'm going to do today. But I also, sometimes it may be not as, I guess, detailed for everyone because they may have a specific question. But I do want to give you a broad overview on it. But then when we ask the questions, then you can go into more detail. But I don't want to make you, experts or anything. It's more just to give you a good foundation of, this is the things that are out there. These are the issues that can be, faced with, and this is some of the solutions that you can have. So again, my presentation is going to be an overview of the entity types information around the United States, the tax structures, government requirements, intellectual property, and insurance coverage. That's basically what we're going to cover this afternoon. When I'm looking at starting a business, or someone starting a business, entrepreneurs, and they want to choose a business entity, one of the factors to consider is the liability, because that's what we all want to protect. We want to protect basically our personal assets when we do business. We want this to be separate from our business. We want our personal assets, our personal estate to be separate from the business. And we don't want any of that mixing and, having that liability attached to you personally. So, and the other thing is, the formalities of it, how to carry out these formalities of these businesses without, running in the file with the corporate laws era. And everyone wants control of their business. So also, how do we set that up? And ultimately, as a business owner, entrepreneur, investor, you actually want to look ahead and say, how am I going to transfer, to the next generation, my business, whether it's to my family, whether it's selling it, or whether it's to my employees. That's the other thing that you want to look at when you're choosing these business entities. And that's some of the things that, when folks come to me to discuss, projects, interest, we have to go through this analysis to look at all those factors and actually ultimately meet the needs of, the business owner, the entrepreneur, the investor. Because like I always like to tell everyone, it's not a one size fits all. It's basically, a custom made plan for each business, each investor, each entrepreneur. So it's not one size fits all. And that's important because every business is different and all the goals are different. When looking at the type of entities, these are basically what we look at, and these are the most commonly known, which is a sole proprietorship, which is not necessarily entity, but it's a way of doing business. The general partnerships, the limited partnerships, the corporations, the LLCs, and the limited liability partners. Those are basically the types and that you see, when you want to do business. Turning over to the sole proprietorship, this is basically a lot of people start this way. It's basically just saying, I want to do business. I don't really have any type of structure, any type of planning for the business, any type of tax planning. It's just I'm going to do business, and it's basically just you're a sole proprietor. And the drawbacks on this is that, well, as a sole proprietor, you're responsible 100% personally for anything that goes on in the business, whether it's tax wise, employee wise, any type of liabilities. It's all falls on the owner, which is not a good way of doing business. It is easy because the management is really easy. There's no formalities when it comes to that. It's just you and you make all the decisions and everything falls on you. And there's also not a lot of tax benefits to this because all of these, sole proprietorships, basically you are doing your taxes on your own personal return for the business under a Schedule C. There's no division that says this is the taxes for the business and they're separate from me as the owner. Everything goes mixed in your personal tax return, which is under the Schedule C, which is you know, the profit or loss on the business, and that's all personal. So anything that's owed, then the business doesn't pay for it. It's you as the owner pays for that. The only really, I should say, type of maybe filing that you would do for this is if you want to do like a doing business as, which is that big fictitious business name filing, which is the DBAs, which is commonly known, which is based on, your business. You don't want to use your name out there in the public doing business. So you say, I want to use a different name. So basically you just file that document, which can run anywhere from 20 to the $100 at the county you want to do business in. And you say, instead of, specific name, that's your name, I want to do business under this name. And that's it. But it doesn't provide you any legal structure protection or any type of plan. It just basically says, I'm not going to use my name out in public. It's going to be this specific name. And that's a sole proprietorship when it comes to that. Uh, when we're looking at a partnership, and we all know what a partnership, it's between several persons. And again, this is not necessarily a formal type of structure. It's just persons can get together, two people or more, and decide to do business or to go into some type of investment. And they can do this orally. It doesn't have to be done some type of written document. It's not recommended, but you can do it and say we're going to be partners and we're partners and you're partners without any formal partnership agreement. Usually you want a partnership agreement because that's going to basically delineate, the responsibilities and also the operational control, the management of the partnership and how that's going to be handled. Because if you don't, both partners have an equal say, or all the partners can basically contract or obligate the partnership without the other partners knowing. And that's pretty severe because if they bind the partnership and the other partners don't know, then all the partners are actually obligated to, for that binding agreement or whatever the other partner didn't know. So that's why it's good to have a partnership agreement in place because this is going to outline who can actually have the operational control, who can make the decisions, who can bind the partnership, who can obligate the partnership. And that's really important because if not, it's an unlimited personal liability to all the partners. And the way it happens is usually they look for the partner that has the most assets, the most money, and that's who they go after, even though maybe that partner didn't obligate the partnership because it's not a formal type of structure. It's just a partnership. So usually we don't recommend this. Usually partnerships are done between entities because they have the liability aspect of it. And then they have a partnership or a joint venture to actually, basically carry out the project. that they're considering. And just to give you a little bit of I guess reality on this when it comes to this real world, how these work. As I said, you can form a partnership by by oral, by text, by emails. And there's a case that happened here in Texas, because that's where I am here in Texas, where these two principals of an investment fund were texting back and forth about wanting to do an investment in the petroleum industry a while back. And they were going back and forth on it as far as terms and what they wanted to do, what they wanted to put out, what the outcomes they thought there was going to be. Ultimately, kind of was open ended. It didn't really delineate a lot of details or specifics. So one of those principals in that fund went ahead with the investment and did very well in that investment. The other principal, the other fund, found this out, and they actually sued the other fund and said, "Well, we were partners in this. You owe me, part of those profits that you made." And the other one said, "No, we did not have a partnership. We were not partners. I invested my capital, the time in the fund, and it was successful. And, you don't get to share that even because you didn't do that." Well, it went up to the Supreme Court here in Texas, and they found out that there was a partnership based on the texts that were going between them. So that means that the fund that actually went into the investment actually had to pay some of the profits to the other fund that did not, based on what the texts were going back and forth. So how do you avoid that? Well, I mean, you can negotiate under text, you can negotiate under, with your words, emails, but ultimately at the end, if there is no decision, you want to put it, okay, sorry, we didn't come to a decision, we just move on. So that, or if we do have a partnership, okay, let's put down this in writing, as opposed to just leaving it open-ended. And that preserves, your rights, because if you don't, then, those words can be construed as you being in partnership. And sometimes you don't want to be in partnership. So we want to make it very clear. So that's why it's like, I don't recommend that. And if you do, you have to have something in writing, because that's going to avoid that situations. Limited partnership. This entity is used a lot in the investment funds, in technology, oil, in real estate. That's where you have a person that's considered a general partner that wants to basically raise capital, but they don't want the individuals or funds or businesses that are providing that capital to have any say so in the operations. They just say, "You just give me your money and I run basically the show." And the general partner controls everything. This is good for a limited partner in the sense that the limited partner is only responsible for the capital that they put up. So any issues that go wrong with the limited partnership, then they don't have to share in that. Basically, the general partner is responsible for that. But if the limited partnership is successful, then they get to share in those successes. So that it's in the best of both worlds. Yeah, you're not going to be able to be operational, but your liability is limited to what you invest into the limited partnership. And this is all done at the state level with these type. This is an entity that's done at the state level, and there is partnership agreements that go with that. So this is like a very common type of structure when it comes to raising capital for whatever projects. So that's a way to do business as well. And again, we go to the corporation, which is, everyone knows what a corporation is. It's the most famous and it's the oldest. It's been around forever. And this is the one that, when they talk about, the stock market, this is what we all think about is corporations, those big corporations. But anybody can have a corporation. And basically what it does is, it prevents you from being responsible for the issues of the business. But what it also further does is that it creates another person. Basically, you're creating a person when you do a corporation. Because under the Supreme Court cases here in the United States, corporations basically have the same rights as individuals, as physical persons. They have the same rights as free speech. They can be charged criminally. They can get credit. They can stand on their own. They're basically a person under the eyes of the law. They're a person, and they have every right. So basically, that's what provides you the protection, because as long as you do business under this structure, then the shareholders will not be responsible for any liabilities of the corporation. They're not going to be liable for the debts of the corporation. So that's important. But the only thing is that you have to follow the formalities. And the formalities is bylaws, it's minutes. And sometimes that can be cumbersome because you also have to have all these documents. You also have to have these documents written. And sometimes when you don't, and basically, you have no history that you can point to as far as how the decisions were made, then they can basically pierce the corporate veil. And that's what I say in this slide. It's the alter ego, piercing the corporate veil issues. And that's what it means is that they said, okay, corporation, we know you're a corporation. The shareholders have this corporation. However, it wasn't maintained as a corporation. It basically was maintained as an alter ego of the shareholder or the shareholders, in the sense that they were not operating this corporation as the way the corporate structure and laws are supposed to be, with the bylaws, the minutes. So what that does is they pierce the veil. That means they break through to the corporation and they make the shareholders responsible personally for all the liability of the corporation. And that's very draconian, because then you have your assets basically, you know, almost obligated for any issues that happen with a corporation. So that's why these formalities have to be maintained, because if not, then they can pierce the veil and they can go after you personally for all the issues in the corporation. So that's why it's important to maintain those formalities, because that's what gives you the legal protection. And then as we move on to the structures, the corporations, they can be structured in various ways. They can have voting rights or non-voting rights. You can have different levels of shareholders. You can have, A shareholders, B shareholders, C shareholders, and each one can have different rights. There can be certain shareholders that can actually decide everything, and there's shareholders that only receive dividends if the other shareholders. So it can be very complex, or it can be very streamlined depending on how you want this corporation to be structured. And that's really important, depending on the business that you're running. And you also have to have those levels. You have to have the shareholder level, the board of directors, and then you have the officers. And that's how you run this corporation. And one person can be all those. One person can be the shareholder, one person can be the director, and one person can be the shareholder. It can be one and the same person. It doesn't have to be different individuals in each spot. Everyone can be the same person. So I can have my own corporation. I'm the shareholder, I'm the director, I'm also the president, secretary, and treasurer. And also can be my employee, the same employee. So one person can be everything. And this is one of those, a very small type of business corporation where one person handles it all. But then there's other ones that do have different levels. So it allows you that flexibility to design it how basically to best carry out your needs and also the business needs at that point in time, which is really important. And then as we move on, and when I talk about types of corporations, I talk more or less about, types in a sense of how you structure these corporations for tax purposes. And when you do these corporations, automatically by default, you have a corporation that's considered a C corporation for tax purposes. And under a C corporation, you have no limit on the number of shareholders. Basically, there's no residency requirements. And what I mean by residency is, are you a U.S. citizen? Do you have a green card? Or are you a foreign resident that comes into the United States to maybe invest? So that's how we look at it like that. No limitation on residency. And basically, you're taxed at the corporate level, and then you also tax at the shareholder level. Is there basically considered double taxation? There's no pass-through treatment when it comes to tax on these C types of corporations. So if their corporation has a profit, then they pay taxes on that profit. And then if there's a distribution of dividends to the shareholders, then the shareholders will pay on their personal tax returns the dividends that they received. And again, there's no limit of classes of stock. And also basically, the capitalization, it just depends on the state that you choose. Before there used to be a minimum that says you have to capitalize it with $1,000. A lot of states have removed this. You don't need a certain amount to capitalize your corporation. You can start it with $1, $100, and then you go on from there. It just depends on the nature of your business. But then we have a different type that's a tax selection that you can make, which is an S corp or a small business corporation. This is a tax selection that you make at the federal level with the IRS. So as I said, every corporation starts as a C. Then you can file an election and says, I want to the IRS and says, I want to be treated as an S corp, a small business corporation. But it has certain requirements. And when you treat it as an S corp, you have pass-through taxation. There's no double taxation like in the C. So in instance, the S corp election will allow you to do an information return that says, these are my profits or loss on the business. If I have a profit and loss on a C corp, I pay tax, but on an S corp, I do not. That profit on the S corp will get basically passed through to the shareholders, and they will pay the tax on any profits that they made on that S corp election, corporation. So there's only one tax at the shareholder level, and depending on your individual rates. So there's no double taxation when it comes to an S corp type of corporation. But there are also so many requirements. You can only have 100. It says 75, but now it's 100 maximum of shareholders. Uh, However, uh, it has to be individuals. Maybe certain estates, maybe certain trusts can be shareholders, but it's very detailed and very difficult. So you have really good advice if you want to have a trust or a certain type of estate to be a shareholder in an S type of election. And also, you have to be a U.S. citizen or you have to have a green card to be able to do that. So if you're someone from another country that comes in that wants to invest in the United States and they want to form a corporation, you cannot have an S corp based on that. There's other situations where you're considered a resident for tax purposes, but that's a whole other issue that you have to explore. And you can only have one class of stock. As I said earlier in the C corp, you can have like an A stock, B stock, C stock. You can have preferred. You can have common. Here, only one class of stock. So basically, if you want to have individuals in this corporation that don't have voting rights, it's going to be difficult to do because there's only one class. You cannot give them other ones. And then within that, you have professional corporations that are specific for law, medicine, dentistry, and accountants. Basically, you have to have a license to have these types of corporations. Moving on to everybody's favorite, and that's all you hear now is LLCs, limited liability companies. That's all you hear about. That is kind of like the rage. But a lot of people don't know, well, why we use an LLC. And an LLC is a hybrid between a corporation and a partnership in a sense that it gives you the same legal protection as long as you maintain the formalities of of the business, and it doesn't attach to the members. In this case, you have two levels. You have managers and members when it comes to a limited liability company, as opposed to shareholders, directors, and officers. You have managers and members. And if you decide to have a president, you can have a president. It allows you to do that. So it's very flexible. But the hybrid comes in the point of the tax treatment, where it combines like a pass-through tax treatment with the limited liability of a corporation. For example, and I'm going to try to simplify it as I can, but say there's only one person, one that wants to form an LLC. So that person's going to be the member and the manager, just one person. So automatically by default, you're treated as, for tax purposes, as that sole proprietorship was treated, meaning all the tax issues when it comes to the business, whether it's how do I, you know, do my taxes for this business, that's a one person LLC, is done on that Schedule C on the personal return. So you're going to put your sales, your expenses for the business, and any profit or loss that's going to be on your personal return, and then you pay tax on your individual rate. And that's the pass-through tax treatment. So it doesn't pay at the LLC level. There's no level there. It just goes to the member, to the owner. But say we have two individuals that own an LLC. By default, automatically you're considered as a partnership for tax purposes. You're still going to have the same liability protection as a corporation, but for tax purposes, you're going to file your taxes as a partnership. So that's the issue when it comes to by how it's treated by default. And then there's another way that you can say, well, what if I don't want to be treated as a sole proprietorship or pass-through tax treatment? If I'm one person or two individuals, can I be treated as a corporation for tax purposes under this LLC? And yes, you can. There's something called check the box in the IRS, and it's a form. And you can say, I have an LLC, but I don't want to be treated as pass-through for tax treatment. I want to be treated as a corporation. So I can file an election, check the box with the IRS and say, I have this one person LLC that I want you to treat it as a corporation as opposed to pass-through tax treatment. So that means that now this LLC is going to do its own personal tax return. It's going to be considered a C in that sense. And if there's a profit, then it pays tax on that profit, and the distribution, then they pay to whoever's distributed. But also you can make an election and do an S election like we saw at the same time. So then you can have the same protection, but also you can have this pass-through tax treatment. But it sounds similar to a corporation, right? It sounds similar like, well, if I just have a one person by default, I'm a corporation. And then if I want, I can do an S election as well. And I'll have that pass through tax treatment on the profits or losses. So why would I do an LLC? Because it seems like, it's the same as a corporation. And if I do these tax elections, um, well, one of the things that the reason we do it is because there's less formalities that you have to follow. As with a corporation, there's not as many minutes that you would have to do when it comes to that. But there's a more important part. Uh, and here in the US, basically, we can't protect money and we can't protect stock. Like if we have money in the bank account personally, or I own stock personally, if I get into a legal situation where a court is obligating me to satisfy some type of judgment, then whoever I own that obligation to, they can go pick up my money, take away my stock. In most states, you can only protect your house that you live in and $60,000 in value of assets for a family. And that's like, clothes, jewelry, things like that. But money, stocks is not protected in a general sense. So if I have a corporation, if this shareholder has a corporation, they get into a legal bind where they're obligated to satisfy personally, not the company, personal situation, then conceivably they can basically pick up that stock and take away their corporation because that'll satisfy that obligation. Under an LLC, you don't have stock, you don't have shares. You either have a membership interest or a membership unit. So since it's a hybrid between a corporation and a partnership, stock doesn't exist. So if a member of an LLC gets into a legal situation where they're obligated to satisfy some type of judgment, well, that creditor cannot pick up the membership interest or the membership unit. So basically, the only thing they're obligated is if they receive some type of distribution with an LLC, then possibly then that creditor can obtain that money, but without, taking away basically your LLC. So you get protection from a business standpoint, but then from a personal standpoint, if there is a personal situation, then basically you're protected in that sense, and that no one will be able to pick up the membership units or interest and take away your LLC. So that's kind of how we started using LLCs, because it gives you the flexibility on the corporate aspect, but it also gives you the benefits of the tax treatment, and then it gives you that extra layer of protection in that your interest in this LLC is protected personally. So that's also a good situation for you. And then ultimately, there's another election that you can make on a state level when you're forming your LLC and say, I want to have a series LLC. And a series LLC means that there's different series underneath the main series. So you can consider it as like a holding company that has different little branches underneath, and that's kind of overly simplistic, but it gives you the idea that, I have this LLC that has different branches, and in each branch, say I have series A, B, C, D, E, and F. Under series A, I have this property. Under series B, I have another property. Under series C, I have another property. So each of those properties is basically protected from the other issues that can happen from the other properties. The taxes are all done in the same type of entity because it's only one entity, but each of the series protects itself from the other series if there's any legal issues. So it gives you some flexibility, especially when you're in real estate investment and maybe you want to have a few rental houses, or you have these other properties that maybe you use to make money on as investments, and you can put each property in a separate series that it's not going to be attached legally if there's an issue with the operations of the business. So that's an important avenue, and that's why I say, these are not one size fits all. Everyone has to like go through this analysis and what's the best situation for them. Um, and moving on to the limited liability partnership, these are basically for like lawyers and accountants and doctors, because you have to have a professional liability insurance individually, and basically also you have to have some type of license to be able to do this when it comes to that. So those are only in those certain situations. The most time you're going to see a corporation, you're going to see an LLC. Those are going to be your primary, entities to do business in. And the general partner, the sole proprietor, the limited partnership, and the limited liability partnership are in, for specific situations. But those are options that you should be aware of that are out there. And depending on the situation, that's something that may be a fit for, depending on the project you're going to carry out, or the business as well. But it's something that you need to be aware of, that's out there. Um, But when we're looking at, we talked about the corporation and the LLC, it's like, okay, which is better, which is not better, and I guess it all depends. There's not really a clear-cut answer, and it's more based on the individuals that, are going to carry out this business or carry out this project or this investment, what's going to be the best for them. Usually the costs are about the same. Uh, the LLC is a little bit more flexible in a sense that, there's not a lot of, shareholder minutes or board of director minutes that have to be carried out because of that hybrid nature of it. It gives you the same tax treatment. You can have it taxed as a pass-through. You can have it taxed as an S corp, as a C corp. So it just depends on that. Uh, and sometimes LLC is a little bit more limited, especially when you have a business and maybe you want to hand it over to your employees. You want to have employee ownership, or you want to have some stock options to your employees. Then you're going to be limited when it comes to an LLC because it doesn't have that built-in aspect of it, and a corporation does. So it just depends, on the goals, what you set out from one to the other. And you can always change entities. I mean, you can have a corporation and they say, oh, I want to switch it into an LLC, and that can be done, and vice versa. So, change of circumstances can happen as you go through your business life. And sometimes, maybe the way you structured when you started was not, you know, adequate now based on the goals that have changed over time. So that's something that you always have to be basically always looking at to see if this is the best way to operate. And that's important. Now we're talking about everybody's favorite, right? The taxes, right? Because everybody that comes to me always says they don't want to pay taxes, or they want to pay less taxes, or they want to, how can we pay less? I mean, that's, I guess, every business owner goal, and not only business owners, but any person's goal is the tax aspect of it. And here in the United States, I always tell people, you can avoid taxes, but you can't evade taxes. Okay. And it's a big distinction, because avoiding taxes is using the tax laws to be actually minimize the tax obligation that you owe. Evading just means you're just not going to pay any tax, and that's where you get into criminal liability. But you can avoid taxes, and that's a way to be able to minimize your tax consequences. When you're looking at individual tax rates, you know, they're from 0 to 37. Those are the brackets. Uh, in 2025, that's going to expire, and the bracket's going to go back up to almost 40%, which is 39% for an individual. And that's something that, you have to look at your taxes, and you have to plan for that when it comes to that. And as a business owner, you have to actually look how you structure your business, because that can affect your individual tax rate. Because we saw in some of these pass-through tax treatments in these entities, basically you're taxed not at the corporate level, but you're taxed on your individual income tax rate. So that's going to be how you also plan for that. You have to plan your business, but you also plan, how is it going to affect me personally? And then as a business owner, you also have to be cognizant of the estate tax. And the estate tax is basically a tax on your assets when you pass away. And it is 40% of your estate. That's the tax you pay, 40%. There is exemptions. Right now, based on the inflation, I think it's going to go almost up to 13 million. So if your estate is worth under 13 million, then you pay no estate tax. If your estate tax goes above that, if your value of basically your estate is over, almost 13 million, then anything over that, you're only going to be exempt that amount, and then you're going to have to pay 40% tax. And they want it in 9 months, and they don't accept payment plans, the IRS. So, if you have a sizable estate because your business has grown, you have a lot of real estate, it's just, where it comes to that level, then you have to do some type of planning to be able to avoid that 40% estate tax. And it can be avoided if with the proper tax planning, it can be done. And that's something that, that we've done very successfully over the years. Because when you're a business owner, my perspective is you're going to grow your business, and it's going to increase in value. And basically, you're going to have a good problem because you're going to have this successful business, and that's very valuable. So how am I going to be able to pass it on to the next generation without having to pay this 40% estate tax? And then the other part is the fiscal residency. And this applies to foreign individuals that come in to invest in the US. And they have their own set, because the United States, we come from a global perspective, meaning that we're taxed on the global level. So any money we make anywhere in the world, we have to pay tax here in the United States on it, or declare it. So if a foreign person has investments, has businesses in here, even though they may not live here, they could be considered a tax resident. So it's like, okay, I don't have any immigration status here because I'm just an investor. I don't live here. I just come and check on my businesses or my investments and I go, but I live in another country. But depending if I stay enough time here in the US is going to make me a tax resident, even though I can't live here or work here, but I'm going to be considered a tax resident. So that's also some planning that has to be done as well if for those individuals that come from other countries to invest in the US. Um, and when we're looking at the local level, well, some states have income tax, and that can be very punitive depending on the state you live in and the business that you have. And then of course there's also the local property tax, and then you have sales taxes. So depending on the state that you businesses and that you live, so you have to consider all the tax consequences, not only at the federal level but at the state as well, because some states are actually better when it comes to doing business than others because of that state income tax. So that's why you have to look at that as closely as well when you're doing business. When you're looking at the federal taxes at an entity level, the tax rate is 21% on all profits for corporations. Okay. So we saw that on an individual, it's 0 to 37, then it's going to go up to like almost 40, 39% on individuals. And that's going to happen in 2025 unless some type of changes happens and they keep it at 37. But for a corporation, there's no expiration. It's 21%. It used to be 39% tax level. Now it's 21% on all profits. So, when you look at it, sometimes it may be better to do business as a corporation, uh, as a C corporation, as opposed to having that pass-through tax treatment, because, depending on your pass-through, you may have a, 37% tax rate that you're going to have to pay based on those profits that you made, or a 39%, after it expires. But at the corporate level, you may have only a 21%. So that's something that you also have to do an analysis on when you're doing this business. Is what's going to be more beneficial, and we can do the analysis where it's like, okay, if you do it this way, it's going to be this. If you do it this way, it's going to be this type of tax. So that's something that you have to look at it when it comes to it, because you said, one of the things you always want to do is you want to minimize the tax consequences, to yourself and to your business as well when you look at it. And that's something that's really important to always check year to year, because that can always change. Um, and at the same time, when you're in an entity, some states have taxes on your corporations as well. So just like you have a personal tax rate, you may have a business, your entity will have to pay tax at the state level as well. So that's something also to consider, is like when you're doing business, how are these states where I'm doing business, how is that going to affect my tax, consequences doing business, whether it's, having to pay on my profits or having to pay on my the sales tax. So it just depends. You have to look at it, and some of the taxes are, also business property tax and inventories that you have. So that's something you have to look at as well. And basically think, is this the best state for me to do business in? Or how can I minimize, the tax consequences in the state that I'm at this time? So that's also important to look at when you look at all these issues that are out there. And then, the government, you have to look at government requirements, turning into the next slide. Depending on the state that you do business, sometimes they require business licenses, not only at the state level, but maybe at the city level, at the county level. They'll require certain business licenses. Other states don't require any licenses at all to do business. So you have to also inform yourself in the type of business that you're going to carry out, whether that type of business that you're going to carry out requires some type of license in the state that you're doing business at. And then, there's always sales tax when it comes to a play when you're actually selling to the consumer. Most services do not have sales tax. So for instance, if you go see a lawyer, an accountant, type of service business, they don't charge you sales tax. But when you're selling retail, there may be sales tax consequences, and it varies by state. And then you also have to deal with, the workforce commissions that they call it. Basically, it's the body in the state that you're doing business that basically regulates the relationship between you and your employees when it comes to, unemployment, injuries on the job, those types of issues. So that's something you also have to be, because some states are more strict than others. There's some states that have an at-will doctrine, which means, I can hire and fire at will. I don't need to follow certain requirements to hire and fire. Other states, no. Other states have a little bit more strict of a system, and you can't just automatically just fire somebody. Maybe you have to go through a process to do that. And at the same time, an employee can leave at any time. They can be a valuable employee that has worked there for 20 years and suddenly they just get up and leave. That's the at will without having any obligation. Same thing with the business. The business can have, employees that are there for 30 years and then one day the next they're gone without a reason, because that's the at will doctrine. And they don't have to actually like obligating to pay for the service that they gave all those years. So it just depends on the state you live in. So some states are more punitive and some states are actually a little bit more business friendly. So it just depends when it comes to that. So those are the requirements that when you're looking at as far as, what do I have to do as far as in the state that I'm doing businesses, because it all plays into, how you're going to be dealing on a day-to-day basis with your state. Um, and every business has to have, when you're an entity, a tax identification number from the IRS, it gets issued. And that's how basically it's equivalent to a social security number. So, how I said that every corporation or entity is like a person. Well, that's kind of like their social security number. That's how they're identified and that's how they pay their tax. And that's how they do business with that. Same, and other states have that as well. So it just depends on the state you do business in. And talking to intellectual property, and this is basically, your image. This can be your ideas. This can be your process for your business, your products. And this is something that, basically sets you out from the pack. This is how you identify yourself. So, under intellectual property, you can have your trade name, your brand name, how the public knows you. And you also have like the doing business that we talked about, the fictitious name, your corporate name can be different than your trade names or your trademarks. But this is something that you have to protect because this is something that gives you your image. And the most famous one probably is that McDonald's, right? The arches. That's like a trademark, a trade name, the brand. Everybody knows it. And there's an interesting movie, Coming to America, where it shows how this individual did basically the same type of concept, but it wasn't called McDonald's. I think it was called McDowell's or something like that. But it had the same arches. And in one of the scenes, you can see where the owner of that business has the McDonald's manual in his hand and is kind of following it. But so that's where you're protecting your name. And that's an extreme example where they were actually infringing on that trademark because it was pretty similar. But basically what it does is says, I have my image that I show to the public. I have my secrets and I want to protect those. And I don't want anyone to get confused between my business and another business, because what if something happens at that other business and then they tie it into mine because they thought it was the same business because they're using the same type of, similar logos, similar maybe slogans, maybe it looks the same, if you're in a restaurant or the product, but it's really not the same because it's not the actual entity or business that actually owns that trademark. So that's where it's basically to avoid confusion in the marketplace. And that's what you want to do because you want to protect that, because then you can franchise it, you can license it as well. And you can use, this confidentiality, non-disclosure agreements with not only your employees that you can give them to them and say, well, you're going to learn these secrets here, but you can't take them with you to benefit yourself or someone else. And at the same time, you can have these when you're maybe entering into discussions with vendors or basically someone that wants to do business with you. You can enter into these agreements to protect the secrets. So if you see, okay, someone's using my secrets, then you have some type of, legal options to be able to protect that. So that's something that's important because you don't want also not only your competitors to get these secrets, but you don't want your employees to set up shop, because everything they learned. So that's something that's very valuable to do as well with your employees and contractors that you may use in your business. Um, and then the last part is the insurance coverage, and this is something that I always recommend for business owners, entrepreneurs, investors to look into because it's very important. And the main one is the fourth one that I showed there, the commercial liability. That's like the commercial general liability. That's the one that all businesses should have at a minimum, because that will protect from issues that can occur in the business. Like if a customer comes in and they get hurt, they slip, well that insurance is to cover those things. Theft by employees, they cover that as well. It's a general commercial policy that is not very expensive, because they're based on your business and the sales that you have. but it does provide you so much benefit. Aside from having your entity properly structured, but you also have this liability insurance to protect you for all those things that can happen in the workplace. And then, there's directors and officers liability. Say you're an officer of an entity and maybe, you have a minority interest in it. Your shares are not the majority, but you're considered the president. Well, maybe you want to consider to have this directors and officers liability that protects you just in case the business gets sued because of the decisions that were made. Then this protects you from that and protects you from your personal liability. And then there's workers' compensation. Some states require it, some states don't. Some states you can be self-insured, meaning that any accidents that happen at the workplace, and you're responsible for. But there's other states that require you to have this workers' compensation insurance, where that insurance is going to cover those employee accidents. And then you also have credit insurance, bad debt insurance. There's all kinds of insurance that you can have depending on your business, the type of business. So that's something that, to have when you have your insurance agent describing, the business that you have, and they can recommend the type of insurance, necessary for your business to protect you from those issues. Because one of the things you want to do is you want to have peace of mind for you can just focus on your business and not worry about those other outside influences that can affect your business, where you can properly structure it through entities and have insurance coverage that can protect that. And that's really important when it comes to how you handle and operate your business from a daily basis. And that I come to my conclusion for today. I know I went a little bit fast, but I know I wanted you to get to your questions and answers. And like I said, it wasn't for me to give you you know this corporate legal education over this hour, but for you to have some basis that there is these type of vehicles out there that can achieve you know your business, for it to achieve success and to protect your personal assets. And also the other thing is just to provide you a basis to go ask questions before you get into a situation where you could have done some planning before, and then now you have to respond to it personally. So it's basically just to give you a good basis for that. So I don't know if we have any questions, Jenny, or if you have
Yes.
questions.
Of course. Thank you so much, Mark. That was really, really helpful. I know that I took a ton of notes and learned a lot from you. So thank you. Now we all feel like we have our little mini hour-long law degree uh, from Mark. And don't forget, you guys, this is part one of two. But yeah, a couple questions coming in. I'll start with this one. Follow me on this.
Sure.
This person lives in Texas and
Mhm.
has a business registered in Texas. If they move to Florida, can they continue running their business registered in Texas, or does it need to be registered in Florida?
And that's a good question. So, for here, what I'm understanding, you have an entity that's Texas, a Texas entity. You do business here in Texas. And I don't know if it's clear as if you do business also in Florida or not. That's the question. So the question is, if you're gonna move to Florida and you're also gonna do business in Florida with this entity from Texas, you can. But you're gonna have to register this entity in Florida as a foreign entity, meaning foreign from Texas, meaning that it's a Texas entity gonna do business now in Florida. So you can actually take this entity, register it in Florida as a foreign state entity and do business. And you don't have to form an entity in Florida, a separate entity. You can use the same one. So it gives you that flexibility, and that goes for any other state. You don't have to actually go form another entity if you don't need to, or if the situation does not require it. You can use the same entity to do business.
What would be a situation where it would require it, where they move and it's like, okay, wait, you do need to set up shop officially in that new state?
Well, if you have substantial presence in that state, and you have substantial presence in that, maybe now you have, employees, you have an office there, maybe you do significant sales there, then okay, you do have to register that business. Or maybe you can consider, I need to form a new entity in this state because maybe I don't want um, that to be mixed. I don't want the Texas business to be mixed with the Florida business. Maybe I don't want, if something happens in Texas, I don't want it to be affecting Florida as well. So, it just depends on the situation that you're at. And that's why sometimes it's good to sit down with a professional and do an analysis on what's going to be the best, for your situation.
Okay, awesome. No, that's really helpful. Another question coming in, do digital products have sales tax?
And what do you mean by digital products? And because That's an interesting concept, the sales tax aspect of it. So what is it? What is the digital product? And I don't know what they consider by a digital product.
Yeah,
Um,
the person that sent that in, it's anonymous, but send me a message and I'll keep an eye out for it in the
and
chat
I'll
and
tell
let
you
me
this,
know.
when
I'm
it's a
thinking
digital
of
product,
like,
it's going to depend on the state.
okay.
Okay, because sales tax is run at the state level. So it just depends on that state. And some states are moving towards that, to do a sales tax because they're going to consider it as a good, you know, and under sales tax, a good is taxable, if you're selling it to the ultimate, end user.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
sometimes they do. So it's going to depend on the state. And there's a movement going towards that because the states are losing a lot of revenue. And that goes to another topic is, if I say I'm an online seller, I'm based in Texas and I sell all over the country, do I have to pay sales tax in those other states? And yes, you do. And that was an important case here in Texas. It was Amazon. Amazon, they sell everywhere. Okay. Amazon was not paying sales tax or collecting sales tax here in Texas because their position was, we're not based in Texas. We don't have, you know, a corporate presence, even though they have a presence because they have warehouses and everything, right? But we don't, our corporate is in Washington, and that's where we pay, our sales tax. We're not going to, collect sales tax. Well, they failed on that. So now that's why you have to pay sales tax on everything that you buy from Amazon, because basically it's where you're selling the product.
So this person did write back. They're talking about online courses, PDFs, like that sort of thing where you're
So
not
like
getting
if
a
it's a
product.
course, usually that's a service and you don't have to charge sales tax or collect sales tax on a service. Most services are exempt. But my thing is to check with the state that you're selling your courses, but most times you do not have to pay. So depending on the state, because every state is different, but as a general rule, you do not have to collect sales tax on a service. But depending on the state, because some states are a little bit strict and they do want you to pay sales tax on everything. So that's one of the things that you have to look at.
Okay, great advice. Now, I know you gave us a lot of information about, corporations or LLCs, and it seems like the answer always kind of depends on the scenario. But if you were planning on staying small, like if you're starting a business and you're planning on staying small, you don't want to blow it out of the water, you don't want to expand to another state, you don't want to hire a bunch of people, you just want to stay small, which would be better, LLC or corporation, or does it
I
still
would
depend?
I would do an LLC with an S election for tax purposes.
Okay. Okay, perfect.
That's what I would recommend.
Is there a state that is best for taxes in terms of business owners?
Well, I would say for tax purposes, sometimes, Delaware is considered one of the good states, for that, from a tax standpoint, Delaware. Uh, then you're looking at Texas is also one, Florida's one, Nevada's one, Wyoming is one. Those are the ones that are considered generally for tax purposes very advantageous. So that's why you see a lot of businesses, setting up shop in Delaware, Wyoming, Nevada, Texas, Florida, because of the tax benefits that you can get, basically less tax.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. And for most people, they're not going to move, right? Like they live
Right,
where they live, and so
right,
you just kind of
right,
deal with it. But for some
right.
people, if they're just getting started, people do move for business reasons if they're
Sure,
planning on, making a
sure,
big splash.
sure.
Now, this may be outside of the realm of what you
Mhm,
do, and if so, totally fine.
sure.
But when somebody's creating like a will or their
Mhm,
wishes for end of life, that sort of
mhm.
thing, is would you include a business in that? If you're the owner of a small business, I'm guessing you have to decide who to leave it to. And is that
Definitely.
separate than a personal will? How is that separated out?
No, that can all be hashed out in a will or a trust, right? Your business. And that goes kind of hand in hand when you're a business owner, because you're looking at, okay, the transition, when I'm no longer the business owner, when I'm basically passing it on, or I pass away, who's going to stay with this business? And usually that's handled through a will or some type of trust, uh, when you want to pass on, because this is what's going to affect you. It's like if you want to pass it on to your family, to the next generation, well, if you're going to pass it on equally, Well, that has to be set out in the will. If you're not going to pass it on equally, that's also has to be set up in the will, because what you want to avoid is the family disagreements and the family fights, and that's what usually sometimes can basically, um, doom a business, because maybe the owner passed on, the main owner passed on. Now the kids, the second generation, maybe were not involved, or some were involved, but if there's no estate planning when it comes to that, then ultimately there's these family situations where there's conflict, and sometimes the business suffers, and sometimes the business will end because of that. So yeah, as a business owner, you want to have that planning in place to know how you're going to pass this business on, whether it's you're going to sell it, or whether actually you are going to pass it to the next generation.
Listen, Mark, hearing all of this, it makes you think, oh, I want to have a business. And then you think of all the different things and you think, yeah, it's just going to work for somebody. Just kidding.
I agree. No, I agree. I mean, it takes a special person, because there is so much when it comes to having a business that you have to do, and everybody just looks at the I guess the trappings of it when a successful business is carried on. But what's behind the success, and the behind the success is a lot of the obligations that you have to deal with from a day-to-day basis, and part of that is also is how am I gonna grow the business, but at the same time, how am I gonna protect everything that I've grown? And
Right.
and that's the important part, because you not only have the tax issues always, but you also have these legal obligations that can pop up, um, from a business standpoint. So it's like you're dealing with that as well. So that's why it's always really important. And I tell people, when you're doing business or you're gonna do this, you have to have, you always have a relationship with a lawyer. You have to have a relationship with a good accountant,
Hmm.
because those are the individuals that are going to, allow you to be successful, because they're gonna, assist you in avoiding the pitfalls and set you up on the right road to be a success, because you don't want to have to worry about the legal consequences. You don't want to have to worry about, tax or accounting consequences. You want to worry about the business, your business,
Right.
because your business is not to deal with taxes or accounting or the legal stuff. Your is to run your business and make it successful. So, the successful businesses that I see is they value those relationships. They value the investment in those relationships, not only in the personal relationship, but the monetary investments that they make in those relationships, because those are the ones that are going to set them up for success. Because that's going to alleviate some of the stuff that keeps them up at night,
Right.
or they can just focus on making their business successful. So
Right.
that's why it's always really important.
I think that's a perfect way to end, except for this one last little question. You
Sure.
mentioned that some of the text messages could be used
Mhm.
legally to indicate, partnership, that sort of thing.
Sure.
What about like a written piece of paper? People talk about a business plan on a napkin. Are those, can you use those in
Yeah, I
court? Do
mean,
they
those
count?
can be used as well. I mean, depending on the situation, um, there's there's a legal term, but I'm not going to bore you with that. I'm going to tell you they can bring in everything from the outside that was used to actually get to the point where you're at in your business. So if there was witnesses, if there was words, if there was stuff that was written, all that stuff can be brought in, to actually ultimately prove what one side or the other wants to actually prove. So that's those napkins, that's words, that's text, that's emails, that's just other people overhearing this. So that's why it's really important that, to avoid that, you want to say, let's put this in writing, and what's in writing, that's what's going to control, not what somebody said, not what somebody wrote in a napkin, not what somebody
Yeah.
wrote in a text or an email. That's why it's important to avoid that. you know
Very, very good lesson. Mark
Mm.
Vasquez, thank you so much. You guys, his email is in the chat for everybody. If you thought this was helpful, and I know I did, here's the deal. It's going to be out on Sarah's YouTube channel by Wednesday. So I know some of this can be a lot to take in. He gave us a ton of information. So if you want to watch the replay or send it to a friend, somebody else who's, maybe starting a business or a business owner, and you think they would find this helpful, it's going to be on Sarah's YouTube channel, which is linked in the chat right now. And Mark is going to be back with us a week from today, same time, same place, for part 2. Mark, thank you so much.